A very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us for our 79th presentation. The Nourishment Projects is about joyous curiosity and being part of something much larger than ourselves. Here are some of the references that inform this presentation, which is titled Bridges. And it's actually serving as a divide. Look carefully, though the plants look similar, they are very different. It's a curious phenomena known as floristic disjunction, and this has fascinated botanists for over 200 years. There exists an entire catalog of species and genera shared by two vastly separated regions that are found nowhere else. And since it isn't land, it makes you wonder what connects them at all. And on the other spectrum, a land bridge, which is known as an isthmus, that connects two large spaces in between water. So, for example, as shown, the Panama Isthmus. Around 20 million years ago, the continents of North and South America were separated by the Central American Seaway. And so the movement of the tectonic plates below the ocean resulted in undersea volcanic eruptions that eventually emerged to form a change of islands between the two continents. And over further millions of years, sediments build up between these two islands and in a land bridge, which is again called isthmus. And so this isthmus, the Panama Isthmus, connected the two American continents, North and South America, for the first time in 150 million years. So the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean were isolated from each other because of this isthmus. And this led to a unique population of ocean life developing on either side of the land bridge. So you have Pacific Ocean on one side, the Caribbean Sea leading on to the Atlantic Ocean on the other. Species that have evolved in isolation on either continent, now thanks to the isthmus, were able to meet for the first time. The area where all this is happening, part of it is now includes Costa Rica. So now let's talk about a sea change that happened, literally. Costa Rica is home to unique wildlife, which has been shaped by millions of years of the land being apart by an ocean until that bridge, the isthmus, joined them. Costa Rica's geographical position also meant it is exposed to predominantly wet seasons on its Atlantic coast, as well as variable wet and dry seasons on the Pacific side. So this mix of weather systems across the country contributes to the rich biodiversity of Costa Rica. And understanding this background where helps us understand what Costa Rica's incredible biodiversity comes from. We need to understand it because it's crucial to protect it. Effectively, that this land bridge matters. It matters for Costa Rica and it matters for humanity at large. So if you look back even further, it is believed that we all originated in Africa and spread from our birthplace in that continent, which is now known to be the Omo Valley near Ethiopia. Due to climate change and for the need for food, we, our ancestors, started migrating for survival. The region now covered by Iraq and Iran acted as a major dispersal hub, with migration stream heading up into Europe, across the rest of Asia, and into Australia and the Americas. It seems likely that the humans first headed east, following, I'm going to close this, the southern margins of Asia. They went to India and to Southeast Asia. And an early offshoot from the path took humans into Europe around 45,000 years ago. Then the eastern migration that we talked about, because they split, that further split onto either sides of the Himalayas. They're going up and down like a river flows around a rock. In this case, the rock happens to be a gigantic rock called the Himalayan mountain range. One path headed north across Siberia and eventually into the Americas. And a second path, taking a southerly route, went across Southeast Asia into Australia. This spread through Southern Asia seems to have been relatively quick possibly due to the similarity in climate of our ancestral home in the Omo Valley in the sub-Saharan Africa. And so they didn't have to adjust too much, they could move further. And our ancestors in this region reached Southeast Asia and China around 50,000 to 45,000 years ago. So this is the general time frame when all this is happening. And due to the last ice age, with the dropping of the sea levels, the land of Siberia and Alaska would have extended to reach towards each other, like the outstretched fingers of the Adam and God painting of Michelangelo on the Sistine Chapel. So you see them reaching towards each other. And at some point, the land connected. And that was when the two vast continents of Eurasia and the Americas were joined. And that has huge repercussions on our story. So that bridge matters. Humans made it across that land bridge into America sometime after 20,000 years ago. So they'd be going from 45,000 years ago to 20,000 years ago. After walking across the land bridge into Alaska, humanity worked its way down through the Americas because the ice sheets are melting. And then they crossed, we are back right to where we started. They crossed the Panama Isthmus into South America around 12,000 years ago. And then they reached the very southern tip of the continent of South America within another millennium. And by that time, humanity had encompassed the entire globe. So these bridges matter. And this is the macro picture. Now, then around 11,000 years ago, when the world warmed up again and the sea levels rose, that Bering Strait back up by Siberia disappeared beneath the waves. The connection between Alaska and Siberia was severed. And after that, the Eastern and the Western hemispheres were cut off from each other completely. Lasting contact was not made again between the peoples of the old world and the new world for another almost 16,000 years until Columbus, or some people before him, set foot on the Caribbean islands in 1492. So Columbus, if you're going to go by that story, bridged the divide among people by sailing through the waters, the Atlantic Ocean. His sense of adventure was the bridge, and I suppose greed as well. So he bridged all that. And throughout history, we see that the sense of adventure has been a bridge for many, not just for people like Columbus. The botanist shown here, Joseph Dalton Hooker, traveled the world in pursuit of, among other things, science, because science was developing then. And Hooker dedicated his 1854 work, Himalayan Journals, to his friend, Charles Darwin. I should say mentor also. And Joseph Dalton Hooker was one of the first people to apply Darwin's theory of evolution to the study of plants, because all this science is developing around that time. And I have to do this because you know I like this stuff. Mr. Hooker writes dreamily because he has the ability to bridge science and art, and I wish they would bring all this back. So I'll read a snippet from his Himalayan journey. So gradually, the golden lines grew dim till the sun set behind the dark blue peaked mountains in a flood of crimson and purple. As evening advanced, a sudden chill succeeded, and mists rapidly formed immediately below me in little isolated clouds, which coalesced and spread out like a heaving and rolling sea, leaving nothing above its surface but the ridges and spurs of the adjacent mountains. These rose like capes, promontories, and islands of the darkest leaden hue, bristling with pines and advancing boldly into the snowy white ocean. As the darkness came on and the stars arose, a light fog gathered around me, and I quitted with reluctance one of the most impressive and magic scenes I ever beheld. That is the writing of a scientist. Could you believe that? What have we lost? So, but as far as Hooker is concerned, when next you admire rhododendrons, think of Joseph Dalton Hooker, because he contributed greatly to humanity by bringing these rhododendrons into the West. So he bridged the knowledge divide between the West and the East, and he lended beauty. because the largest presence of rhododendrons was in the Sino-Indian Himalayas. I mean, look at them. Next time you plan to go to India, instead of Jaipur and Delhi, go on these hikes. You can schedule them. This is not meant to be a travel insight, but here's a hint, it's worth your time. Hooker's traveled allowed him a larger perspective to be able to bridge connections. And so he noted similarities of the floras of Australia, New Zealand, and southern South America in his 6-volume contribution, Flora Antarctica. And he had published that between, I think, 1844 and 59. So it's been published for a while. And in that, he proposed that land bridges, again, isthmus, once existed between these huge land masses. Similarly, other botanists like Francis Kingdon Ward helped bring Himalayan beauties like the blue poppy to the Western gardener. I mean, just look at the flower. It's like a burst of sunshine on a blue cerulean sky. So both Kingdon Ward and his wife traversed many previously uncharted areas. And look at these. I love archives. There is a step into a world that behooves us to know of it. So when they had these adventures, they had a sense of adventure and they knew that their adventure included risks of danger. Himalayan travels are even now fraught with peril. These are roads. I mean, I took a modern picture. That car, this is what they call a well-trod road. So Francis Kingdon Ward's postcards to his mother reads, and I'm going to quote, "Our walking tour is just at an end. We descended to Sultan this afternoon. We finished up by ascending 2 peaks, and you can see the peaks in the card, of over 4,000 feet. And we'll write soon." So he sends this to his mother. It's a nice way of knowing what did he do that way. So imagine what he covered, how he covered these areas. If you look at the map, it shows many rivers they'd have to cross. Look now. Yes, these rivers are beautiful. The scenery is stunning. But now imagine the lived experience more than 100 years ago of traveling through these areas. So this is early 20th century. These are raging glacier-fed rivers. And to be helpful, there is a bridge. Now, 100 years ago, that bridge likely was made of bamboo. Other times when they're crossing the rivers, and this is just indicative of any adventurers who went through these areas, that bridge might have been nothing more than a fallen moss-covered tree. Looks romantic, try covering it. When you're doing these travels, one encounters peoples whose lives depend on bridges. So then you walk through bridges like this. This probably looks really nice on, travel adventures, come meet the indigenous, but living that life is entirely different. You have to walk through this. Take that in, because back then, as you're walking through this, you're also traveling with these. Mules were essential for people like Joseph Dalton Hooker, Francis Kingdon Ward, the whole 9 yards. They're carrying, adventure seekers traveled well. They carried, I'm not joking, tea sets and all. They lived civilized as much as they could. So all of this is being carried on the backs of these mules across rickety bridges. Did you ever wonder what a mule thinks of crossing these rivers when they're doing all this? A word comes to my mind. I'm not going to use it, but can't. So even today, in the early spring, glacier melts start. And the flood water, when it comes from down here and it starts melting, early spring, you can hopefully note, here is the snow melting because it's all dry now. And very rapidly, flood waters will begin to rage. And at that point, if you want an adventure, walk across this plank. Because take a good perspective, look at the distance you have to cover. This is what the adventurer did. These bridges were necessary because these were not hop, skip, and a jump across. You're doing this across this entire swath of land, rivers in there, glacial melt, all of this matters. Top it off with snowstorms and monsoon. They didn't travel too much in monsoon, thank God. So keep all this in mind when next you go to the museums and libraries and recollect the romance of the Silk Road, which includes documents and collectors who collect loose leaf manuscript like these birch leaf manuscripts, or the very famous Diamond Sutra, which is currently in the British Library. What I wanted to do is literally bridge the gap between how we hold them and how we got them. Because all of these were adventurers because they love that spirit of adventure. Sven Hedin, Count Otani, Paul Pelliot, all of these people, many others. This man eventually became the president of Finland. There was a huge drive to have these adventures. Hats off to them. And the one that I deeply admire, R.L. Stein, all of them risked so many things, including intellectual dignity, because they did meet forgers. When there's money to be exchanged, and this man was a forger, he forged documents. So you go through all this trouble, you think you found something. It's like, not true. But the larger message is, look, they did all this. They traveled over all these mountains into deserts, don't forget, with their mules and then eventually their camels, the whole menagerie. And some of them to get, I'm going to point now, this is the Dun Huang caves. They're very famous for, this is where the Diamond Sutra was found. They're traveling with all this. And a funny thing, an interesting thing, if not funny, about R.L. Stein, he had dogs and they were all named Dash. He named all the dogs the same thing. Anyway, so all of these are traveling to get to, so here's Dun Huang. These are the caves. And what looks like, oh, what a nice little mountain. It's the huge Gobi Desert, all the Mongolian desert behind it. To get into these little holes, these are the caves. And inside these caves, look what they have. R.L. Stein had the help of this one Buddhist monk, Wang Wanlu, and he discovered, among many other treasures, what is now known to be the world's oldest printed woodblock manuscript, the Diamond Sutra. It's not obviously made of diamonds. It is saying the hardest steel that cuts through false beliefs, diamond that cuts through the wrong beliefs in your mind. Anyway, the real joke was this sutra was probably discarded as garbage by its original owner, but because it's a holy document, they couldn't throw it away. So it was stored in one of the caves. And so when it was found, because it had survived more than a millennia, it suddenly becomes a treasure. So this is literally one man's garbage is another man's treasure. Loads of such treasure, like the Diamond Sutra, was found in the caves, and they all had to be carefully brought back. They all had to traverse, now you go back, raging rivers on rafts. So there is R.L. Stein, and with him, he's collecting all the treasures that he has found. On rafts are made of goat skin. Because when you live in these areas, all of life is valued by the indigenous. Nothing is wasted. Where would humanity be without the traditional day-to-day survival skills and knowledge of people that we often look down upon, thinking they're not intelligent? Yes, they are, very much so. Isn't it amazing how an object, for example, these goat skin or the Diamond Sutra, bridge time, goat skin rafts from centuries ago, helped the British bring treasures from 10th, 11th century, more than a millennia ago, bridging over the rivers of humanity, of culture, of time, of geography, all of it. And on a practical level, crews like this, and there's another dash, I don't know if it was the same dash, there's another dash in there. They had to cross fjords on what, here's your bridge, I would most generously call, if I'm being very kind, a ropeway. And this ropeway is going to let us leap into another area, because this is happening everywhere. A ropeway, a bridge on the other side of the world. It's a rope bridge in Peru, Quechua rope bridge. I want to say it correctly. Its sustainable design will be apparent to all. So the annual reconstruction of the bridge, which happens even now, is seen as a community obligation. Hence the word obligation. They pay it forward. So it's a collective word. The wild grasses are called koya. They're harvested. Everybody gets together and they harvest it. And then over several days, families braid the grasses into cords. Men, women, mainly women, but men as well. The cords are woven into three strong braids. And after a ritual offering to Mother Earth, a community member crosses the bridge to the other side, carrying a rope to pull supplies onto the other side. So they bridge that gap. The old rope is cut and allowed to fall into the Apurimak River. It's all natural fibers, so it does not harm the environment. And then the bridge builder begins. He starts braiding those cords on the other side. So he's the architect of this. He forms the structure, forming the floor and the railings, sides of the bridge, and this is happening from both ends. And then literally you have a joyous meeting in the middle. And at the end of all this, there is celebration, music, food, and dance. So this is a celebration of sustainability, of culture, of environment. But more importantly, because these are traditions, this community activity is bridging time, honoring those who came before them, and very generously and with a sense of obligation again, sheltering the future for those who are to come. Things that last, legacy, bridging, eternity. I just love this larger view when we see world for what it really is. Look at that. This is going on for centuries. Maybe the clothes have changed, the flag is probably synthetic, but the better, more beautiful version does not change. And now, from Peru, for bridges where the architect is now, if you look, sunlight and rain. We return to India in a place where these turquoise blue ponds exist and a land of mists. It is called Meghalaya. I think, Tracy, you've probably been here. And appropriately, the name means abode of clouds. It is a high, sodden, rumpled, and stream slashed corner of India's remote, and I would like to emphasize, beautiful northeastern panhandle. Not too many tourists go there, local tourists go there. But also, it can be a misery to walk there because these corrugated slopes, which are sheeted in mists, are clogged with jungle undergrowth and thereby with the water greased with mud. During the monsoon rains, which India is famous for, foot trails between villages plunge again and again into gorges where you have the hissing waterfalls and the fierce roar of practically impassable rivers. So navigating these natural obstacles requires iron lungs and the power of prolonged observation, and then the generosity to share that knowledge. It demands thousands of years of attentiveness and a lifetime of experimentation, because this is the solution of generations of problem solving. This is the ingenuity of the Khasi and Jaintia people who are from this area of Meghalaya, the Cherrapunji region, and they have been trekking these living bridges ever since their baby steps. These are the living tree root bridges of Meghalaya. The locally abundant Indian rubber tree produces strong, rope-like aerial roots that, when you lash the roots together, and you can use it to scaffold a hollowed out betel nut trunk, or you can tie it up to bamboo stalks. You then train the roots patiently over decades to grow horizontally across steep ravines and riverbanks. So this is an entirely different mindset of approaching bridge building. Eventually, with aching slowness, but nature works tirelessly and steadily, the roots are coaxed to entwine to form the struts and supports for these living footbridges that can hold at least 30 to 40 people at a time. Isn't it something? This practice came into existence years ago as a solution to decaying bamboo bridges. mature root bridges, which can bear up to 30 to 40 people at a time, over rain fed rivers, which are gushing and full of life, is necessary for these people. You need to cross back and forth. I would like to put this in context. Just recently, you just heard of a bridge collapse not far away. We are constantly hearing of billion-dollar infrastructure projects full of latest technology, hence the billions of dollars. And this latest technology, billions of dollar projects, become obsolete within decades, if not within years. But observe here, this is not metal bridge that needs to be mandated or taken care of. You do take care of it, but in a very different way. It provides a lifetime of service. Bridges that literally connect generations. So they're bridging generations, bridging all of nature in the bigger picture, animals, humans, plants, we all work together and we are connected through and to beauty. This was the bridge I wanted you to know of at the very least. There was a deliberate choice not to make this presentation into a gallery of bridges. There are many beautiful bridges in the world, don't get me wrong, man-made bridges that are very pretty, but I was not interested in doing that. It's very readily available, and if that interests you, please enjoy them. They're beautiful. It could be the Bridge of Sighs in Venice or the countless bridges that are being built all over the world and have been built for the last 100 years or so. Man-made architecture does not scaffold this presentation. Vision does. So things seen from the backdrop of eternity is really needed to absorb architecture, to understand what these buildings meant to the builders. So this is Mont Saint-Michel, which has been so many different things in its long life since it was founded around, I think, early 8th century. Saint-Michel, so it's dedicated to the Archangel Michael, and he sits on a rock on a granite in the sea. It was originally the hopeful assertion of Christianity in a Europe that was still partly pagan and very vulnerable to Viking raids on the northern coast of what is now France. 2 centuries later, so this is around the time of the Tong Song culture, the Duke of Normandy gifted the site to the Benedictine monks. So it's around that time. And these monks began building an ambitious abbey church under the patronage of William the Conqueror. And this becomes an expression of a richer, more confident era as the Normans, who were the former Vikings, were about to set out not to only just conquer England, but also Sicily and southern Italy. And so now if you put all the past presentations together, around those areas of southern Italy, those are all being ruled by the Muslims then. So lots of sea changes happening, but we're interested in geography right now. So Mont Saint-Michel sits atop, well, an island and becomes a major pilgrimage and a locus of ecclesiastical and political power. So it is kind of guarded off. It's a bridge to the gods when you walk down that bridge. And effectively, when the water comes in high tide, talk about a baptism by nature of the building itself, so to speak. So the waters come in. And I wanted to show you this. Yesterday was a full moon everywhere. And there was a new bridge that was built. So in high tides, the water washes around this very picturesque landmass. And when you have a full moon, can you imagine when they pull the tides up, especially on harvest moons and things like that? The wall of water can reach as high as a 4-story building. If you look, when you have tides, look what happens. Can you imagine that? You better be praying when you're walking down that bridge if that is happening. So another bridge that connects us to the story of religion brings us to, this is another bridge that we're going to see now, but this is not in Mont Saint-Michel. It is Sri Lanka, island of the coast of India. And this is where in the great Indian epic Ramayana, and that was penned 1,000 years ago almost, the author Valmiki speaks of a bridge over the ocean that connects India and Sri Lanka in that epic. And so that epic poem that stretches nearly 24,000 verses narrates the life of the divine Indian prince Rama and his struggle to rescue his abducted wife Sita from the demon king Ravan, who was the ruler of Sri Lanka. So Sita has been kidnapped by Ravan, the 10-headed demon god. Forget all the interpretations, it's just a short story. So Prince Rama's army, because he's going to go save his wife, includes monkeys and bears. And the monkey and the bears team, especially the monkeys, build a bridge to connect to Sri Lanka, to go from India to Sri Lanka. I don't know why they just didn't build boats, but we're going to go ahead with the story. It would have been so much easier to raft across, but they build a bridge. Good for them. Just saying. Anyway, when recently a NASA photograph, so if you look clearly, this is the cloud, the NASA photograph of that region between India and Sri Lanka showed a meandering causeway disappearing into the distance. And this happened in 2002. Online conspiracy theorists had a ball and went off on a wild goose chase trying to prove that Rama's bridge was actual, that it was a real man-made structure. And many Orthodox Hindus consider the existence of a bridge to be an unshakable proof of the Ramayana itself, which was a poem. And so they believed everything that is in there, including the war between the paragon of goodness, Ram, and the 10-headed demon king, Ravan. That bridge is the proof to them that this is just not a story. Read into that. Connection of bridges to war during our own times is indisputable. The bridge on the Kwai River is an historically important site that explores the atrocities committed during the construction of the Siam-Burma Death Railway. This is during World War II. The consequent Bridge on the River Kwai movie, which is set in 1943, starts in a POW camp in Burma along a route of a rail line that the Japanese were building between Malaysia and Rangoon. In the movie, the Japanese Colonel Saito is not a military pro. He had learned English while studying in London. And then he tells the British character Nicholson, who you see right there, that Saito himself, that he likes corned beef and Scotch whiskey. Look at the connections. But because Saito is a rigidly dutiful officer, we later in the movie see him weeping privately with humiliation because the British Nicholson is a better bridge builder. And Saito prepares to commit harakiri if the bridge is not ready on time. On the other end, the British Nicholson is too blinded by his pride of efficiency. You know, I can get this done. He doesn't realize that the bridge that he's so valiantly building hinders the Allies. And so these two disciplined officers who never ever bend quietly share a vision of completing a bridge. It is the bridge that connects those two, but with absolutely divergent goals. The movie ends with the lament, madness, 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 because that is what happens, the futility of war. So that is the wooden bridge that is about that movie, Bridge Over the River Kwai. But the wooden bridge does more than just communicate a story about war. Wooden bridges in Iowa has propagated the story Bridges of Madison County. It was a 95 movie starring, as you can see, Clint Eastwood and Meryl Streep. The movie is about a National Geographic photographer who woos an Italian war bride who had married an Iowa farmer and moved to the Midwest. And when he lands up in Iowa, she agrees to help him photograph the region's famous covered bridge. You know, in a macro way, isn't it very lovely? That film, that medium of film, brilliantly bridges people across the world through empathy. Because it helps in just the two movies that we're covering, right? It helps recognize the universality of loneliness, to be able to understand the underlying desperation of a tradition-bound Japanese colonel, an isolated Midwestern housewife, or a globe-trotting photographer. All of this through the medium of a film. It bridges all of us. There's so many bridges all around us. That's the larger message of this presentation today. But back to the story of bridges of Madison County, while only 6 of the area's originally 20 covered bridges remain, thousands of dollars have gone into restoring these timber bridges in Iowa, and all of them now appear in the National Register of Historic Places. Now the presentation is going to get even more murky. Well, not more, it's going to start to get interesting by my standards. Wooden bridges detail the story of Americana in a very subtle way. Archives show that in the autumn of 1765, there was a Mr. John Hutchinson who tramped over the trails from Connecticut to New Hampshire with little more than a horse. And now I'm going to quote what was written in the archives. Upon which rode his wife and babes, some clothing and bedding, and also another necessary animal to a growing family, a cow. The family paddled across the Connecticut River in a log canoe, with the animals swimming alongside to a clearing that was soon to be part of the town of Norwich. Jerome Hutchinson, who was a baby then, was fond of relating when he became an old man his distinct remembrance of the appearance presented of the old white-faced cow as she struggled bravely to keep her head above water while swimming the river. Close quotes. That peril of crossing a river should bring to mind the adventures those people had in Asia, trying to get from one place to the other, except without a cow, they had camels and horse and mules and whatnot. So imagine if these people who were settling America, they had access to the bridge that came later, if the bridge had been available to them. The question I want you to ponder, who invested in those bridges? Because these were all private enterprises. So these were companies with shareholders. Here is one of the shareholders, a Mr. Dickinson. The Connecticut River Valley, in which his daughter, Emily Dickinson, lived out her days, was replete with thick woods, velvet green hillsides, and, as you can guess, scores of bridges, albeit the bridges weren't tarred, they were wooden bridges. The Connecticut River not only promoted trade, this is not the bridge during her time, because she died a little around this time, so the bridges during her time were a bit different. So the river not only promoted trade throughout the valley, it also inhibited it, depending on when it flooded. Boat traffic carried goods along the river, descending through Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. And that river often was a major barrier when it flooded. And so it was the barrier between the western and eastern New England. As you can see from flooding now, bridges were valuable, and that is why people invested in them. And so in 1869, this is times of Emily Dickinson, the 6th Sunderland Bridge had washed out, and the value of her father's shares, Mr. Edward Dickinson shared, dropped from $2,700 to $1,000. Huge amount of money during that time. So back then, as of now, when floods happen, and this is happening right now, people lost fortunes. Now, just like they did then, it's happening constantly. The river flows through all this history, and it is mystic beauty. And by that, I don't mean mist as an M-I-S-T. I mean mystic as an M-Y-S-T-I-C, because look what is written. I stepped from plank to plank, a slow and cautious way. The stars about my head I felt, about my feet the sea. I knew not but the next would be my final inch. This gave me that precarious gait some call experience. Take a moment and think. That bridge building back then was a technology. So she used technology to fuel her poems. It's like if a great poet right now uses AI to inspire poetry writing. Creation, it does happen. It's happened before in other forms. What's her name? Mary Shelley was inspired by the discovery of electricity to write Frankenstein. History repeats. But look what Emily Dickinson has done. A precarious wooden bridge becomes a metaphor for the uncertainties of the human condition. Experiencing a loss of family fortunes due to the destruction of these bridges, due to flooding, her lived experience of that informs her poetry. Because, like it says, I don't know what's going to happen next. It's blank to blank, day by day, what is going to happen. Emily Dickinson lived through the times of the building of the Erie Canal. And she's reading about all this. This is her lived experience. This is what is informing her. She also lived through the times of the railroad suspension bridge near Niagara Falls. These were huge technical feats of her times. And this shows up in her writing. Her poems are full of references to bridges. What does she say? How brittle are the piers on which our faith doth tread. Now, piers are the things that hold up a bridge. So when it says how brittle are the piers, can you visualize a pierless bridge, a bridge without something holding it up? Yes, you can. The famous Niagara Bridge was in fact peerless. And by that time, during that time, peerless also as in Peerless, because it's one of the first and famous suspension bridges. It was held up by cables. And so look at the parallel, look what she does. She goes on to write in another poem, which is Faith is the peerless bridge, supporting what we see, to the scene that we do not, too slender for the eye. And she goes on to write this. What is she writing here? It's that bridge is personified as a confident and attentive mother, where the bridge has arms of steel which hold and gently rock the soul to comfort it. This woman surprised me beyond beliefs. Rather than an easily washed out wooden plank bridge, the poem describes this suspension bridge constructed of steel, because she mentions the steel twice. These arms are two strong primary cables. And so when she says, how brittle are the piers on which our faith doth tread, no bridge below doth totter so, yet none hath such a crowd. It is as old as God. Indeed, 'twas built by him. He sent his son to test the plank, and he pronounced it firm. She's talking about bridge. So she makes God, the structural engineer, a master builder of the bridge, omniscience, omnipotent. And if you look at the words carefully, you can obviously tell I like poetry. With the aid of the passive tense, the lines ends on an equally emphatic him, and which is then obliquely rhymed with the word firm. So in a reversal of historical development of the idea of the sublime, in spiritual awe, she applies the marvels of engineering back to its original source of creation, God. I can't believe this is just one poem by her. I wasn't even a fan of her work till I came across researching for this presentation. The bridge's age-old character in this poetry is reinforced by the fact that it is an outdated wooden structure, not the latest, during her time, 19th century iron and steel engineering wonder. The plank, the word is in there, which is a part of a structural, it's a very fundamental structural component of the wooden bridge, also alludes to the wooden cross on which Christ was crucified, obviously. And because Christ has gone before through death and on to resurrection, in her poem, she's saying humanity should take the courage to cross the tottering bridge of death and life. I was dumbstruck by the brilliance to be able to connect 19th century bridge building development and connect it to the sublime liminal state between life and death, the immensity of such a transition. What a clever, penetrating mind she had. Completely a sexy beast. I was like, oh my God, I should read most of her poems, and I will, which helps lead us to the most subtle bridge of all. When the description for this program was sent to you last week, the description ends very simply with the word connect. The essence of a bridge is connection. That's what it does. Land, isthmus, bridges made by us. Bridge is about connection. With that in mind, look back. The presentation had started with the Omo Valley. Human migration started there, which eventually spread across the Bering Strait. What about before that? Our real ancestors. One of our simian ancestors at some point decided to stand up instead of crawling about on all fours. Then, for me, even more importantly, that one of those creatures decided to look up. So, to hold the head up high instead of letting it hang down. Because what happens when you look up, metaphorically and literally, you get a greater vision. That matters. What can you connect to? You need to see it and imagine it. This, to me, I thought, this bridge that we have, this spine, it's connecting our brain to the rest of our body. What is it that separates us from other animals? Because we are animals. Now, I acknowledge animals can dream, bees dream, animals dream. They're all spiritual creatures. What I feel for the most part, our ability, our curiosity, this creative imagination to plan for the future, all these activities of the brain, of the human, is what makes us go ahead. And so this bridge, look at it, look at your rib cage, look at your spine. This physical manifestation of a pathway through bridge, the spine, the brain compels the body to serve the mind. That bridge fascinates me because look, what made that monkey disobedient? Because all its family members were walking around on all fours. Somehow or the other, this little imp thought, let me stand up. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care if I look weird. I want to walk on four. I don't want to crawl. Why not? So, with that in mind, look at the significance of us standing up. Look at the significance when a baby stands up on his or her own 2 feet, takes a first step. That first step, beginning of being a human. So, what made a simian at some point in our history decide to try something different? To be curious that no one walked onto before. Why did they do that? Sheer curiosity, as in why not? And so, the biggest bridge, the bridge that matters to me, curiosity. That's what made people like Christopher Columbus, Joseph Dalton Hooker, Francis Kingdon Ward, Aurel Stein, so many other people, Ibn Battuta, because they were travelers and adventurers throughout the world for centuries. And even now, they wanted to explore, to see new things, to get exposure. Through that exposure, through that curiosity, build empathy, which is the building block for humanity, to care for the other. Curiosity helps, is that bridge, not just helps, it is that bridge that connects all of us. This loving call to come, play, connect with me, take it all in. That is the bridge I care about. That is the story I wanted to tell you. I hope you enjoyed it. But before we go, I would like to make a request or a suggestion. I wanted to make sure people understand what this is. The Nourishment Projects, which are these stories, it is a private enterprise that creates presentations and operas. The Nourishment Project's NFP, which stands for Not for Profit, is the non-profit arm of the Nourishment Projects. And this is an educational organization which inspires curiosity and courage to live joyfully. It is just about finding what makes you happy. The website for that is the Nourishment Project's nfp.com. If you have the time, I would be very grateful if you would go to the website, drop onto the archives, and see the work that is being done by the students. They do lovely work, and I would like them to be acknowledged. I want people to see what they do. So if you have people who support and appreciate different kinds of learning, simply send them the website or take a look at it. I would be very grateful. That's it. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the story. I'm going to stop sharing now.